Fresno, California. This is the Christopher Gabriel program on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400.
One of the things that we have talked about on this radio program 5 or 6 times since moving the program here to the beautiful Central Valley is high-speed rail. And invariably, you have shared your thoughts. It's probably been, to this point, about, oh my goodness, about 80-20, 85-15 against the project. So one of the things that we wanted to do for quite some time is to bring on a couple of individuals separately. I'm not interested in turning a segment into Crossfire, who can shed light on high-speed rail. At 3:35, we'll talk to Congressman Jeff Denham. Coming up, we're going to talk to the chair of the High-Speed Rail Authority here in California, Dan Richard. 7 minutes, 23 seconds past the hour of 3 p.m. Pacific Daylight Saving Time. Dan Richard is an accomplished and elite financial mind. He has been a principal of Dan Richard Advisors since 2010. He was an elected member of the San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit, BART, from 1992 to 2004. And among other things, he helped secure $4 billion in capital for system rehabilitation projects. Mr. Richard, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
Let me tell you where I'm at with this and where I want to go. I'm someone who in my lifetime, Mr. Richard, I've been a train guy. I grew up with L trains, with subways, with commuter trains. So I'm not an anti-train guy by nature. But this project so far to me strikes me as something as wrong project, wrong time. So what I'm hoping as we go through this a little bit for a couple of minutes is you're going to help me understand why this is a good project. Sound good?
Sure, that's fine, but please call me Dan.
Dan it is. I never do it without getting approval first. All right. So let's start with this. In 2006, Dan, Proposition 1A passed by voters to build high-speed rail. The thought was at the time, as in most projects, there's a number that's attached to it, somewhere in the $30 to $33 billion range. Now it looks as though there are going to be cost overruns pushing the project up. Right now we're hearing the LA Times came out with a story at $68 billion. I talked to a couple of individuals directly who were mentioned in that project we'll get to in a moment. As a starting point, did the board anticipate that there would be cost overruns, and do you anticipate this number to ultimately go higher?
Well, just a couple things. The ballot measure was in 2008.
Excuse me.
And I was not involved in the project then. Governor Brown was not involved in the project then. He was elected in 2010, and in 2011, he brought in his leadership team, which included me. I think it's an interesting question for my friend Congressman Denham, who's going to be on. He's one of the guys who voted for this with that $33 billion number. So, the congressman and I go round and round on this. We like each other personally, but, my point is, well, I wasn't there to put that number out to the public. You guys were. We came in and we looked at it and we said, this is what it's going to cost. We told the public honestly what we thought it was going to cost, which was going to be more. And part of the reason it's more is just, people make these estimates, but when you actually sit down and you've got to move things around to protect businesses in downtown Fresno, when you've got to move things around to protect the rendering plant in Kings County, which is important to the dairy ecology down there, as you really start to build this, and you have to do it in a way that tries to minimize, you can't avoid, but to try to minimize the impact on people and businesses, it costs more. But I will say this, that $68 billion number, by the way, represents the total fully inflated cost. That was not a number that was put in front of the public. We're saying this is what it's going to cost to build with inflation over the next 15 years. So we're very forthright about that. And the thing is, right now, we've issued 3 major contracts, and we're coming in hundreds of millions of dollars under budget on those contracts. And I think that $68 billion number, if anything, is probably moving downward, not upward, despite what people may believe.
Visiting with Dan Richard. He's the chair of the High Speed Rail Board, state of California. So given what you just said, Dan, and according to a couple of things that I have in front of me, including the LA Times piece, Rail Authority say the suggestion in the piece is that approximately $53 billion still needs to be gathered or accounted for, as it were, to complete the San Francisco to Los Angeles line. And the thought is that as this project moves forward, there will be private investors who will help finance the system. When I read that, my first thought, and again, looking at these kinds of projects in other parts of the country that I've lived in, it reminds me of what my priest in the Greek church growing up used to say. He said, Christos, you don't marry potential. Is the thought here that it's almost a given that private investment will line up to donate, or is that something that you and your fellow board members have at least a modicum of a concern about?
Well, I don't think we have any concern about it. I think we know that the private sector investment will be there. The real question is when. And the private sector is not going to be investing in the project in the early stage, because we don't have other high-speed rail lines in America for them to look at and compare with ridership and so forth. So they're going to need to see some initial operation before they come in. And we've made this point, a number of us have made this point for years. But we do believe that there will ultimately be about a third of the system built with private sector dollars, about $20 billion. And you know, one of the guys on the board with me that was appointed by the governor is the former vice chairman of Bank of America, and he's looked at all the financial numbers. He believes very strongly that it's going to support that kind of private investment, but it's not going to be there at the beginning, and we've been pretty clear about that. It will be there. And, you know, I can't tell you right now where every dollar is going to come from to build this, but we have the first federal dollars we got, we have the state bond money that the voters voted on. We have cap and trade money now from the governor and the legislature. We do believe that the private sector will be putting up a lot of money for this. And, you know, we're moving forward with it, and we can start to see how those gaps are closing. In Japan, where the private sector came in and took the system over after it had been running for some time, they get a third of their revenues from the real estate development around the stations. We haven't even started looking at things like that yet. So we are going to be able to build this, both technically and financially. It's going to take some time, but people will look back on it. It's important. If I could make one last point.
Go right ahead, yep.
Here's the thing that people always ignore. It's not like we can just sit around and do nothing. The state continues to grow. And what we've looked at is if we don't improve the rail system and do some things like this, if you tried to expand Highway 99 to 6 or 8 lanes all the way up, it would take 5 times the amount of agricultural land that we're talking about for high-speed rail, and would cost 2 to 3 times as much. And the federal GAOs come in and looked at our numbers, and they've confirmed this. To get the equivalent mobility of what we're building with high-speed rail, you're going to end up spending $130 to $180 billion on more than 4,000 new freeway lane miles and 5 new airport complexes. So it's not like we're comparing high-speed rail to sitting around and doing nothing. We're going to have to invest for the future, and this turns out, when you look at it, to be both less expensive and more sustainable and do less damage to people's property and the environment than trying to do it the traditional way.
Dan Richard, the chair of High Speed Rail Authority Board here. So then, again, taking what you're saying, I spoke directly, one of the people in the LA Times article that certainly you know, probably backwards and forwards at this point. I spoke directly by phone to Herbert Einstein, a civil engineer at MIT and indeed one of the top tunneling experts in the nation. And I asked him to illustrate a little bit more or amplify on when he said that he talking about the range being much more complex in terms of the tunneling that's going to go through. And his exact quote was, having looked at a number of these long tunnels, the California plan is aggressive. From a civil engineering perspective, it is very, very ambitious, to put it mildly. And I asked him to explain what he meant by the word ambitious, and he said He said, I want to be clear, tunneling isn't new. It's not anything that's not able to be accomplished. But the concerns that I would have, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously, Dan, the concerns that I would have are the intricate fault lines that go through the Angeles National Forest, San Gabriel Mountains, and so on, and having trying to go through there and not disturb land that's already or underground land that's already been disturbed before. Is that something that when you read individuals like him and others that were quoted here, is it something that you've already accounted for and that people shouldn't be concerned about, or is it something that is an ongoing analysis as the ground shifts and so on?
Well, let me remind people that as the professor said, this is not new, and one of the things that, of course, everybody in the Central Valley is familiar with is the State Water Project, because the Water Project helps bring life-sustaining water to the Central Valley, which makes it the most productive agricultural sector in the world. But that Water Project also carries that water beyond the Central Valley down into Los Angeles, exactly through those very ranges that we're talking about here. The tunnels go in to the mountains of the Tehachapi's and through the San Gabriels, and they come out and they deliver water to L.A. That was done in the 1960s. Tunneling technology has dramatically improved even since then, and we have on our team some of the world's greatest tunneling experts. The Spanish company that just completed a very, very long high-speed railroad tunnel under the Pyrenees is one of the advisors and consultants on our team. And by the way, that company has told us that they think our engineering estimates that we've used, if anything, are too high. They believe that they could do it for cheaper than what we've been looking at. Another one of our expert consultant companies helped build the rail tunnels under the Swiss Alps. So I am not going to deny, and I'm not a civil engineer, that there are challenges here. But these challenges are all things that we've been looking at for years. We've talked to the Japanese, we've talked to the Spaniards, we've talked to the British companies that built the tunnels in the Alps. We have a tremendous amount of engineering talent on our team right now, and none of them. I mean, I got calls after this LA Times story came out, and they all said, there's nothing new here. We knew all of this. All this is being accounted for, and they're absolutely confident that we can build this, and we will.
So, respectfully, sir, here's what I don't get. I'm going to take what you said because you know more about you know more about this than I do. I'm going to take what you said and then counter it with people like, from the piece, Leon Silver, Caltech geologist, saying no way, the range is far more complex than anything these people know. People like Bent Flyberg from University of Oxford business professor talking about delays and things that are going to have cost overruns, and there's a history of cost overruns going around going around to high-speed rail projects around the world. James Monsees, formerly with Parsons Brinkerhoff, saying that it's not a realistic project in terms of getting it done even remotely on time. Faults are notorious for causing trouble. What I'm leading to is this. Where you're saying, your experts are saying one thing, and then we're hearing and talking to experts that are saying another. People who voted this in and now are having their doubts are left in the lurch, not understanding who to believe. Does that make sense?
Well, what you just said makes sense, of course. And yes, there can be experts on both sides of things. Let me make one point.
Please.
You mentioned Brent Flyberg, the professor at
Oxford.
We work very closely with him. We have put together probably the most sophisticated risk management program of any public infrastructure project in the United States, and we're in constant communication with him. He's a world expert on what goes wrong with major infrastructure projects. And I'm not going to insult you or your listeners by saying that things won't go wrong. But I will tell you that we work with many, many, many people, some of whom are highly critical and have questions, to try to get all the information we can. You know, the voters were told that a high-speed rail system could be built between San Francisco and Los Angeles. To do that, you were going to have to go over the mountains, through the mountains, and so forth. So it's not like we just invented this. The people who put this on the ballot, including my friend Mr. Denham, who's going to be on your show, told the public this. Our job is to deliver it, and to deliver it in the way the public expected it. And I will tell you, you were very kind at the outset to talk about work I'd done on BART. We have other people on our board who have, long professional reputations. I'm not interested in having people remember me or Governor Brown or anybody else as the people who screwed this up. We are doing the very best we can to get all the information that we need to do this. And will there be voices on the other side? I'm sure there will, and we will listen to them. But I'm telling you that, I'm talking to an equivalent number of engineers and people with vast experience and great credentials who are all saying, we know how to do this. Building under the Pyrenees between France and Spain was not an easy matter, and there's seismic activity there too, but they did it, and those trains are now running. You can now go on high-speed rail from Paris to Barcelona on an overnight high-speed train. Those are the people who are working with us to build our system.
Dan Richard has been my guest. Dan, one last question for you. This region, as I'm sure you know, this region was this area, Fresno, was one area that voted against high-speed rail. One of the lingering questions that listeners hear, and we have a sizable listening area, is transparency. It's always the issue. Anything political, no matter which side people are on, there's always an issue of transparency, whether you're talking about President Obama, Governor Brown, Mayor Swearingen, or in this case, Jeff Morales. So for individuals here listening to us right now, listening to you right now, who are concerned about transparency and believing that they're being sold a bill of goods, they voted on one thing, the project's going another way, what do you tell them in terms of this project moving forward, and it's going to move forward in the best possible way that's going to be viable financially and otherwise?
Well, first of all, I think the point you make about transparency is vitally important, and we saw this with the Bay Bridge. But I will tell you right now, the thing that offended me the most about the article and offended me the most about some of frankly, the politicking that people have done around this is that people who are listening can go on our website at the High Speed Rail Authority. You can get instant access to all of our reports, and every month our Finance and Audit Committee meets in open session to review where we are on our budget, where we are on risks. All the reports are put up on our website. Our meetings are public. We're meeting next month in Fresno so that we come out to the various regions of the state where we're operating and make it easier for people to come to our meetings, to ask questions, to get answers. But as I said, all of that information is available on our website. The legislature has an independent peer review group that reviews what we do. Their reports are public. The federal GAO, the state auditor, they've audited our program. Their reports are all public. And the things that we're doing, I think, are right out there because we know this is the biggest infrastructure project in the United States, and it could be a tremendous boon for the people of California. No region is going to benefit more than the Central Valley. The Central Valley is going to benefit more from this project than any other part of the state. But we want to make sure that people understand what's going on, that they see what's happening, and they see how their money's being spent. And I will just tell you right now, I categorically reject any suggestion that we have somehow not been open with these reports. The people who are making these politically motivated statements know exactly what the truth is, that all of this information is available to the public through our website and through other means. So it's something we do take very seriously, we take great pride in, and that's why I kind of take umbrage when some of the politicians try to jump on this and suggest that something else is true.
Dan Richard, he is the chair of the California High-Speed Rail Authority Board. Dan, I appreciate your candor and I appreciate your time, and I look forward to hopefully getting you back a little bit down the road.
Well, thank you very much. The Valley is very important to us. I'd be very happy to be a guest on your show anytime, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. There you go. There's a whole bunch of tweets out there. I see that Representative Denham is here, and I am excited to welcome Congressman Jeff Denham. Congressman, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. So I just had Dan Richard. On with me, and we had an interesting discussion to say the least. Let me start with this. One of the things that he said in the latter part of our discussion is that the California High-Speed Rail Authority, that board, group of individuals, is the most transparent agency in the state of California. Do you believe that?
No. If they were the most transparent agency, they would give the LA Times the information they ask under the Freedom of Information Act. They give us the information as a subcommittee overseeing rail across the country. No, there have been a number of requests from different agencies that they continue to hide the facts on.
I told him, and I want to break this down with you in a bit. I told him that I spoke directly to Brent Flyberg, University of Oxford, business professor. He was quoted in the LA Times piece. I spoke directly to Herbert Einstein at MIT. We spoke by phone. We talked. There's any number of individuals quoted here, folks far smarter than I am, geologists, tunneling experts, suggesting that there are going to be significant issues. Yes, tunneling is something that's done all over the world. There's no doubt. Projects have been completed. But as Mr. Flyberg suggests, that when you look at high-speed rail projects around the world, there is incredible cost overruns. They're almost never done on time. On the other side of that, Congressman, what Dan Richards said is, listen, we have some of the greatest engineers in the world working on this, and we're hearing that, and I'm paraphrasing, everything's going to be smooth and dandy. What we're left with is who do we believe here?
Well, you just have to look around the globe. Some of the smartest engineers in the world wouldn't touch this project. That's why so few would actually bid on the project itself. I mean, this is something that, first of all, had initial cost overruns of almost $70 billion. And so to cut costs, they cut off the Sacramento and San Diego legs of the project, which voters had initially approved under the $33 billion project. So now they've scaled it back, only to see a balloon back up another $40 billion because of the tunneling. I mean, this just doesn't make sense. It continues to grow out of control. The experts are saying that, with the fault lines that we have in California, with the Tehachapi's, it's going to have huge cost overruns and nothing to pay for it.
I want you to hear something that he said just a moment ago, Congressman.
I think it's an interesting question for my friend Congressman Denham, who's going to be on. He's one of the guys who voted for this with that $33 billion number. So, the congressman and I go round and round on this. We like each other personally, but, my point is, well, I wasn't there to put that number out to the public. You guys were. We came in and we looked at it and we said, this is what it's going to cost. We told the public honestly what we thought it was going to cost.
The question in play here, Congressman, is I said right now that the project started in the $30 billion range. It went up to $100 billion. It's dropped to $68 billion. Now we're hearing that there's a number about $53 billion still out there. And the example I used to him, the parallel, Congressman, I said, when I was growing up in the Greek church, my priest said, Christos never marry potential. And it seems like we are being told, listen, we're certain that the private sector is going to give us the $53 million. Are you that confident?
Well, first of all, the only truthful statement in there is the fact that Dan Richard and I have a very good relationship. We do personally like each other, although we have huge disagreements on this project. I support high-speed rail, and we're going to see Texas put the first high-speed rail in place with no government dollars. We're going to see the second one going into to Florida, again being done by private investors. And in California, not only have we taken a $33 billion project and let it balloon up to $100 billion, but now, with this tunneling, you're seeing another $30, $40 billion hammered onto it on top of that. And it is true. My voting record is very clear. When it was a $33 billion project, it took a lot of convincing to make sure that we had a guarantee for the voters that this could not grow out of control. The only thing I've learned out of this whole thing, and the voters of California have too, is don't trust government. Because in this initiative, you've taken a $33 billion project and exploded it well beyond control. What I would say back to Dan Richard is, if the project has changed from what voters originally intended, then let's take it back to the voters and let the voters decide. But to go out and spend hundreds of billions of dollars that was not approved by voters is not only dishonest, it's something the state just can't afford. We've got priorities, and water storage should be the top priority. So even if it was a $33 billion project, times have changed. Our priorities as a state have changed. I don't think it would pass under the original agreement, let alone $100 billion in cost overruns.
I can tell you, Congressman, without hesitation, that we have, in the 10 months that I've been here, we have reached out repeatedly, and I emphasize the word repeatedly, to Mr. Morales, and never even had a response back from him. And that was why I asked at the latter part of the interview, how transparent do you believe Jeff Morales has been? And it's troubling, I think, when you look at voters, you have citizens here where this project is ostensibly starting, wanting to get answers. And I mean, I'm not trying to do some sort of beat down here of Jeff Morales, but I've got to believe that at some point he's willing to come forward in a forum other than a town hall meeting like they've had down in Los Angeles, in San Gabriel, in the Silicon Valley, and so on.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. This comes down to trust in government, and when the voters see that the wool's been pulled over their eyes and that government has run out of control, and there's no cost controls in this any longer, people are very frustrated. It's a complete lack of trust in government. Whether you support this project or not, we've got to look at infrastructure projects with our ports, with our highway system, and most importantly, with our water storage. How are we going to convince voters that any of these projects are going to be under control when the biggest thing that this state has faced has grown this far out of control?
How do you respond to this? Because you're talking about it now. One of the things that we have broached on this program, Congressman, is the very real situation of the drought, of the water problems, of the Central Valley not getting water. You have towns like Porterville that are just dying for water. And I have been told on repeated occasions, well, you can't conflate the two, but you can't avoid conflating the two, can you?
No, because ultimately it comes down to trust in government. And if you believe that the government is going to operate for the common good of the people and that you're going to have your tax dollars spent wisely, this project runs completely contrary to that.
How concerned are you and the people that you talk with when you hear people like Leon Silver, when you hear people like James Monsees, when you hear people like Herbert Einstein saying that there are concerns ranging from moderately concerned to significantly concerned about messing around with fault lines? Yes, we all know that tunneling has gone on all over the world, but I think it's a safe statement to make that there isn't a place in the world outside of the Pacific Rim in the ocean, out in the ocean, that has more seismic activity than where they're going to be tunneling.
No, it's certainly a concern. It's a concern with whether you're doing one large tunnel or two separate tunnels. The cost is completely different between the two. But ultimately, we should be looking at areas that are least prone to earthquakes and where our fault lines are. We know where the majority of our fault lines are, and we've got to be cognizant of that.
How far do you think, and I'm just asking you to speculate, how far do you think this? Let me backtrack. Dan Richards said that the cost of this is actually dropping. Do you realistically believe that this project is going to drop below $68 billion? Because I don't know many projects like this that I've seen in my lifetime. The Big Dig in Boston, the situation up in Seattle. I've not seen many things that have start to drop as opposed to going up.
First of all, this has gone way above the contingency that was originally set up under this project. It has grown grossly out of control. I wouldn't expect them to ever get costs back under control. But I think the bigger question is, how do you get it back to a system that was approved by voters? Voters approved a $33 billion project that also went to San Diego and Sacramento. They've already cut those legs off. I mean, so if this went back before voters, are you going to really have the entire state support something that, even if they got into the cost controls? This, on every level, is a gross abuse of the system. Last
thing for you, sir, and I know you were fitting us in a busy schedule, and I appreciate it. We had a caller, and I thought his point was very fair. He said, listen, and I'm paraphrasing, I work on high-speed rail. I don't understand why people in the valley don't understand how good this is for the valley, how many jobs it's going to bring, and so on. Can you amplify on that?
Certainly, yeah. That question has been brought up to us several times over the last 8 years. 8 years is when President Obama approved stimulus dollars. In 8 years, not one job has been created. Now, if you expanded ACE Train from further into the valley, you'd have jobs immediately. If you built water storage, you'd have jobs immediately. If you wanted to improve Amtrak, you'd have jobs immediately. 8 years on shovel-ready projects, stimulus dollars that have been sitting out there that now next year will revert back to the federal government. The jobs have been sorely missed, and the proposals that we're continuing to see are jobs that would actually employees that would come from outside of the valley in. We're seeing foreign equipment coming in. We're seeing foreign companies coming in. It ought to have everybody very frustrated.
One quick follow-up. I mentioned to you that I spoke to Brent Flyberg at University of Oxford, business professor there, and in the LA Times piece, they point out, according to his group's research, and it's extensive when you go through it, that high-speed rail projects around the world experience an average of 45% in terms of cost growth, though 100% increases have occurred in some cases. Is there any reason to believe that this won't fall rather the 45% cost growth and instead lean more towards the 100? Does it seem like that's the direction this is going?
Yeah, grossly out of control. I would say if you want to put any cost controls in place, find a private investor, just like Texas and Florida have done. Put them on the hook for it. I guarantee their investors will make sure that they hold them accountable to any cost overrun.
He is United States Congressman Jeff Denham. And Mr. Denham, this is a couple times you've been on the program. Always a pleasure to track you down. Look forward to talking with you down the road.